Good morning. Reagan and I were down in San Diego the last 3 or so days, attending a conference on Ecclesiastes, an intense Bible study with other Christians, mostly preachers. And they had come in from all over the country. And you get into different conversations with people, and they ask about how the work is going. And one of the things that I almost always tell people from other parts of the country is that the work here tends to be a couple of steps forward and 3 steps back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And our turnover rate is ridiculous. People moving all over the other parts of the country where a lot of these guys are coming from. They are the beneficiaries of people that have passed through here. But God has this way of renewing what goes on here in the most remarkable ways. And as I look across the room this morning, I see people from Memphis and Kansas City and North Carolina and Atlanta. I see people from South America using Google Translate from English into Spanish. I see an American who was in South America for years, who's back here now, whose father was just baptized this last week. I see people from China by way of Florida, or from Taiwan, or from the Philippines. I see Hispanics from other parts of the country or the state. I see East Asians and Europeans, and Andrea's probably tuned in from Germany, maybe with her mother right now. People who are black and white, every conceivable ethnicity, people from way out in the Pacific Ocean somewhere. You're from everywhere, and you're here now, at least for a time. And we're worshiping God together and singing a song that God will take care of you. And He will. He has this amazing ability to do that. There was once a 17-year-old boy running an errand for his father when suddenly his life took on a tragic turn of events. He was kidnapped by his own brothers, who almost killed him. And then they sold him to slave traders, who then transported him to a foreign land. In that foreign country, in spite of the fact that he was absolutely faithful to his master, he was betrayed by an evil woman, his master's wife, and then thrown into jail. For 13 long years, from age 17 to age 30, he languished in that situation. And it took 2 extra years because a fellow inmate, for whom he had done a profound favor and asked for just a little bit of reciprocation, totally forgot about him for 2 long years. And so for 13 long years in all, until his fortunes changed, he must have wondered, why hasn't my father come to rescue me? After all, he had been the favorite son, the spoiled son, and now there was no one to bail him out. When things finally got better, he gave to his firstborn son a name which means making to forget. How sad that must have been to hate his earlier life so much that he just wanted to totally forget his childhood, his brothers, his father, part one of his life. Let's just erase the memory banks on all of that, start from scratch at age 30 when life finally gets good. And then one day, while he's sitting on a throne, his brothers enter the picture and interrupt an otherwise good life. And on one level, they just kind of ruin everything and bring all of that flooding back into mind. For those of us who know the rest of the story, we know that Joseph enjoyed a happy ending. He would finally tell his brothers at the end of his life, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people would be kept alive as they are today." Genesis 50:20. In retrospect, Joseph saw the hand of God in all of these events, putting him in a position to serve. He was the right man in the right place at the right time. And he realized that looking back, hindsight is 2020, isn't it? But in the middle of that, especially from age 17 through age 30, there must have been a lot of nights when he looked up into heaven and just asked the question, why? To recap what Reagan preached the last Lord's Day evening, I'd like to use the given me from one of my mentors, Phil Roberts, a long time ago. The three coats of Joseph. The first coat of Joseph was the coat of many colors, the coat for which he is most remembered. And for this particular coat, summarizing Genesis 37, this is working. Yeah, thank you. He faithfully serves and prospers. He's the favorite son, becomes the favorite, receives a coat of distinction. It becomes a mark of honor and a mark of jealousy, the mark of separation between Joseph and the rest of the brothers, the other 10 at least. He is betrayed in his faithfulness. The coat is stripped from him. He's cast into a pit. The Hebrew word is bor, and his coat is used to deceive. His brothers will take the coat, slay an animal, put some blood on the coat, and say, is this your son's coat? Sell their brother into slavery. He goes down into Egypt. He's in Potiphar's house, and he'll receive a second coat. We don't talk about that one so much. But he becomes a favorite of Potiphar. He serves faithfully and he prospers. He becomes a favorite. He receives a coat of distinction. He is betrayed in his faithfulness. His coat is stripped from him, this time in the arms of Potiphar's wife. He is cast into a pit. It's the same Hebrew word, bore. No longer pit this time, but dungeon. But it's the same word in the Hebrew. And his coat is used to deceive. The one who wears this coat lusted after me. No, it was really the opposite. But Potiphar's wife, who had adultery in her eyes, now deceives the one that she had wanted. He's put into prison, and wears a third coat. He faithfully serves and prospers. He becomes a favorite. And finally, after 2 years, the chief cupbearer has sudden memory recall. You need someone to interpret your dreams. I happen to know someone who might be able to do it. Joseph receives a coat of distinction. He becomes the vice ruler of all of Egypt, the grand vizier. And that's when the cycle ends. And that's basically a summary of where Reagan took us last time. It's, as Yogi Berra would say, it's deja vu all over again. But there's a lesson in providence here. Could Joseph have ever worn the third coat as well as he did if he had never worn and lost the first two? He was unspoiled by his sudden prosperity. He tells Pharaoh when he's interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. 41 and verse 16. In verse 52, he names his second son, not making to forget, but for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction, Ephraim, which means fruitful. And so could he have worn the third coat as well as he did if he had never worn and lost the first two? But we're going to talk about the rest of the story in our remaining time today. His brothers barge in one day. You have 7 years of prosperity. We're now in 7 years of famine. And Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, challenges his sons, why are you just looking at one another? Get down to Egypt and buy food that we might live and not die. They do so, they barge into Joseph's presence. He sees them and he cannot believe his eyes. He doesn't know exactly how to react. Chapter 42 of Genesis, beginning with verse 8, says, and Joseph recognized his brothers. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them, and he said to them, you are spies, you've come out to see the nakedness of the land. They said to him, no, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies. I think he doesn't know exactly how to treat the brothers after all of this. But be that as it may, as he is interrogating them, he finds out that they have a younger brother who is still alive. From their own admission, he already knows about Benjamin, his younger brother. But Benjamin has not been permitted to come with him to Egypt. And so he hatches a plan and says that he will put them in custody, and eventually it's only one of them who will remain in custody until they go back and bring that other brother, his one full brother, Benjamin, back to Egypt. Oh, how he longed to see Benjamin. And when he tells them that, you have bombshell number one, bombshell revelation. Chapter 42 of Genesis, verse 41. And they said to one another, in truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us. As miserable as I have been all these years, they've been more miserable than I have. And they're still carrying the guilt of what they did to me. Revelation number one. Revelation number two, the next verse. And Reuben answered them, did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood. And they did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. And he turned away from them and wept, and he returned to them and spoke to them. Revelation number two is Reuben talked them out of their worst nature and urged them not to sin against me. So the one prisoner who is retained as ransom for Benjamin is not Reuben the oldest, but Simeon the second oldest. And then we have in chapter 43, the famine is severe. The brothers convince the father to return with Benjamin, even though money has been returned to their sacks by Joseph and his people. And even though they risk all being arrested because of that, they return with Benjamin, and they beg him for mercy. And in chapter 43, beginning with verse 29, he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son. Joseph then hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. And he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself, he said, serve the food. They served him by himself and them by themselves, and so on, and gave Benjamin a double portion. We have in chapter 44, after they are sent away, he puts his cup into Benjamin's sack, again returns their money, and arrests Benjamin. He urges them all to continue on. I just want Benjamin. They all return to Egypt. And he's unprepared for what they're about to do. So Judah speaks up. Verse 18 of chapter 44. Judah went up to him and said, oh, my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's ear. Let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself. My Lord asked his servants, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. And you said to your servants, bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes upon him. We said to my Lord, the boy cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. Then you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall not see my face again. We went back to your servant, my father. And we told him the words of my Lord. And when our father said, "Go again, buy us a little food," we said, "We cannot go down. If our youngest brother goes with us, then we will go down, for we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us." Then your servant, my father, said to us, "You know that my wife bore me two sons. One left me, and I said, 'Surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have never seen him since.'" Revelation number 3. The reason my father has not come to rescue me all these years is because he thought I was dead. Never knew that before. Verse 29, "If you take this one also from me and harm happens to him, you will bring my gray hairs in evil to Sheol. Now, therefore, as soon as I come to your servant my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant, Judah, became a pledge of surety for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with us? I fear to see the evil that would find my father. The next revelation. These are not the same brothers anymore. Instead of up to no good, they are willing to sacrifice themselves. Completely changed. And it's at that point that Joseph could not control himself any longer. In verse 1 of chapter 45, he says, "Make everyone get out of here." And he revealed himself to his brothers in awkward fashion. I don't think he quite knew how to do it gracefully. He simply just blurts it out in verse 3, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" Well, obviously he's still alive, but this is one of those terribly awkward moments. But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. He has them come near. He says, "I'm your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. The famine has now been in the land these 2 years. There are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. It was not you who sent me here, but God." I think more than just the brothers had grown. When you put all of this together, you see some links in a chain. From Abraham's time, we learned that his descendants would be strangers in a land and would be afflicted 400 years. From the time of Joseph, we learned that that land would be Egypt. The immediate cause is that Joseph was the acting vice ruler over Egypt and that he had called for his family to join him in this foreign land. How did he get to be the ruler over Egypt? The immediate cause was his prediction of 7 years of famine, followed by 7 years of plenty, or vice versa. Pharaoh's wise decision to give Joseph this appointment. How was he in a position to interpret the dream? None of the magicians of Egypt could interpret it. And the butler The chief cupbearer had sudden memory recall. And exactly at the right time and in the right place. All of these are links in a vast chain. This link and this link and this link and this link. And what they add up to is God had a greater plan in using human instrumentality and free will in light of his greater providential care. But the big picture of things is that he preserves the Israelites. He molds them, he makes them, he shapes their character. They're rascals at the beginning of the story, and somehow or other, they're changed. Joseph's changed. His brothers are changed. They are becoming the people that God wants so much for them to be. J.W. McGarvey, in a sermon on Joseph toward the end of his life, early 1900s in Lexington, Kentucky, says a young man who has true character, unfaltering fidelity, and some degree of energy and ability cannot be kept down in this world. A young man like that is a cork. You may press it under the water, but soon it will pop up again. Oh, that the young men of our country had such integrity, such power to resist temptation, such resolution and perseverance as this young Jewish youth had. And then he says, and what is true in bringing about this result in the family of Jacob may be true in regard to every family of importance in this world, and it extends down to the modes by which God overrules our own acts, both good and bad, and those of our friends, and brings us out at the end of our lives, shaped and molded as he desires us to be. Now, that's a thought to chew on. That your life is full of ups and downs, and maybe some very dark times when you're asking God, why? Why this? Why me? Why now? And then later on, in retrospect, you look back and you're able to connect the dots, able to see the hand of God in all of it. We may not always know why God allows adversity to visit us, but adversity builds character in those who desire it. And in chapter 50 of Genesis, after Jacob dies, his brothers will once again beg him for mercy. And he'll once again console them. You meant it for evil, God meant it for good. He overrode your intentions and used it for a much greater purpose in order to bring about this present result, to keep people alive so that I could be the right man in the right place at the right time. Do not worry, it's going to be okay. We're all going to be okay because God is at work. Years later, when David will offer a confession of sin in Psalm 32, and it's one of those confessional psalms, one of the few places in the Psalms where God answers back. Usually it's human beings talking to God, but this is one of those places where God talks back at the end of that prayer for forgiveness. And one thing God says back to David is, I will instruct you and teach you in the way that you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. Whether it's in confessing your sin or asking that question, why? Why these dark times? Or looking at the bigger picture of things, you have a mentor, you have a personal coach, you have a God in heaven who loves you very much. And he will counsel you with his eye on you every step of the way. If you let him, if you put yourself at his disposal, if you let him mold you and make you and position you, put you in a place of service where you can do what you were meant to do, He'll do that for you so that he can bring you at the end of that process into a position where you can serve him in keeping with all the resources, talents, and the abilities that he's given you, and so that you can cross the finish line and spend eternity with him forever and ever. So often we're just looking at the little snippets on the timeline, and we lose the big picture. But I'm convinced that this many chapters at the end of Genesis are there so that we can be reminded, look at the big picture. God will take care of you. You believe that with all your heart? I'm so thankful you all are here. You come from so many different places, spiritually and geographically. I'm thankful you're here. Put yourself at God's disposal so that he can use you in his service and so that he can bless you beyond your wildest imaginations. He will, you know. In the bigger scheme of things, all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. If you really believe that, then obey the gospel and put yourself at his disposal. Repent of your sin. Say, here am I, send me, use me. I'll be your servant here, serve you faithfully, and then take me away home to glory. Let's stand and sing a song of invitation. Encouragement.